The NHS is a fantastic organisation to work in, and we all take pride in what we do. But we didn't sign up also to deal with almost mass casualties on a daily basis.
David Knott has been an NHS doctor for 40 years, and through his work in some of the most dangerous war zones in the globe for the past 25, he's become world-renowned. And it was 4 years ago, on his return from Aleppo, that he found himself unable to speak during a lunch with the Queen at Buckingham Palace. She sensed her guest was seriously traumatised, as he recalled when he was on desert island discs.
She got one of the biscuits and she broke it in two and said, "OK, why don't we feed the dogs?" And so for 20 minutes, the Queen and I, during this lunch, just fed the dogs. And she did it because she knew that I was so seriously traumatised.
Now he's working on the COVID frontline, retraining in an intensive care unit in London. But he still has his eyes on war-torn countries most at risk of the virus, and warns about what he sees as our failure to engage with the stateless and impoverished in countries like Syria and Sudan. If we do not raise our heads to help them, they'll flee the camps of the Middle East and instead come to Europe, carrying infection with them. We need a world leader, he says, to step up and act now to stop the virus in its tracks. Well, David Knott joins me live. Good evening. David Knott, first of all, as we've explained, you have worked in some of the most hellish areas of the world on some dreadful injuries. But I wonder now, working in a COVID hospital, in a way, is there a comparison you can make?
Yes, there is. I mean, we all stepped up to the mark when the COVID crisis began. And I was almost surprised, really, how it really was like a mass casualty event. In war, you get mass casualties, and sometimes it overburdens your hospital, and you can't deal with them all, and you have to triage. What we were feeling at the time was that perhaps the same thing was going to happen, that there's going to be a mass casualty event. So we all basically retrained, and it was an amazing thing to do, really. We took our normal hats off of surgery and whatever, and became normal doctors, and were trained by the intensivists how to look at ventilators and prone patients, turn them on the intensive care unit. And I just stepped up to the mark like everybody else did.
Well, I know that in the Lancet article, you are critical of the government's initial response. Where do you think the problem lay?
Well, I have the paper in front of me, actually. It was a paper written from Hong Kong with Professor Wu, and his final line in his paper, which was published on the 30th of January 2020, says large cities overseas with close transport links to China could also become outbreak epicenters unless substantial public health interventions at both the population and personal levels are implemented immediately. Well, that was in January the 30th. I'm not blaming anybody at all, but I don't quite really understand why a scientific or from an epidemiological standpoint, why there seemed to be nobody that really picked up this and really waved this red flag, because we had 4 weeks really of everybody just shrugging their shoulders, thinking it was all going to go away and there was nothing to worry about.
So here we are, you've been working unusually in a way with the full panoply of the NHS. Often you have very rudimentary medical equipment and indeed help. But you're very, very concerned about the impact still yet to hit on both refugee camps and areas of other settlements, particularly in the developing world.
Very much so. I mean, we had a massive amount of infrastructure. We had equipment, we had ventilators, we had nursing staff, we had doctors. And when you think about the results that we had, this disease is so virulent, it's so dangerous and so pathogenic, and so it causes such high mortality that results recently that have been published from the Intensive Care Society have shown that 65% of patients that were in the best hands possible died. And if you had another kidney problem or something on top of that, then you had an 80% chance of dying on a ventilator.
Yes, sorry, I just want to ask you, I mean, the scenario you are suggesting is that we are, by the very fact that we are so inward-looking, we have actually got another crisis on the global doorstep.
Absolutely. If you look at David Miliband and you look at his International Rescue Committee, he did some modelling based on the Imperial College and WHO. And in 34 fragile countries, he's shown that in the next few weeks, if we don't do anything, 500 million or 1 billion people will become infected. And of that, 3 million will possibly die. And that is in the low-income countries, hostile environments, and so on. And so the big problem is that it's nothing to do with ventilatory support in these countries. It's all to do with prevention. We really, really have to ramp up public health support in all these countries.
But you saw
otherwise it'll be too late.
Yeah, but you saw the failure of international cooperation in Syria. What you seem to be suggesting is that you have doubts about international cooperation here on this front unless it's led by somebody specific, not a country, not a group, not a committee.
Well, I think so. I mean, the big problem, how I see it, is this is a global problem, and we're really all in our little countries dealing with the problems on our own, and making big mistakes not our countries, but other countries are making huge mistakes. And when you look at the Ebola crisis and you look at, what happened in the monetary system in 2008, it was led by a global leader, really, and that was America. But now I don't think we've got that global leadership anymore. And what we really, really need is a global pandemic executive, perhaps, which can go to every country of this world and say, look, we have learned from this pandemic. We have learned how to deal with it. We know what the problems are.
Led by whom?
Led by David Miliband, without a shadow of a doubt. You've got somebody who's a respectful statesman, politician, and has an enormous track record, and he needs to be in charge of it.
So I wonder, you demonstrate in your Lancet article that the fear that you have is that some of these refugees in dire straits will try and come here, and that will then reinfect, as it were, the West. And you paint a gloomy picture, but I wonder if there's anything that gives you a shred of hope in all this.
No, there isn't. We really need to get our act together within the next few weeks. What we have is this time now, which is like February for us, what we had this year. We have now got their February this time. So we've got 4 weeks to do as much preventative treatment, much preventative care as we possibly can, ramp up public health services, get people in, for example, water consultants, engineers, make sure that all these countries have proper hand washing, have facilities for social distancing, because that is the only way that this virus is going to be contained.
David Knott, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And tomorrow's papers are just starting to come in. We have 3 here. Let's look at these. The Telegraph. 2-metre rule could be relaxed in exit plan. Lockdown restriction under review as evidence of its usefulness is questioned. Picture there of Princess Charlotte on her birthday, having made homemade pasta and delivering it to the elderly. The FT. Offices set to stay shut for a month. Working from home is the new norm. No timeline for hospitality. And finally, the Scotsman, warnings over new normal lockdown drinking. Fears about consuming more alcohol in Scotland. And their colourful scrubs being designed and made by children at a secondary school in Glasgow. Well, that's all from us for this week. Emily will be back on Monday. Until then, I hope you have a peaceful weekend. Good night.